So, President Bush, I think you said it earlier, let's get it on.
Let's go.
And I think the first question is over here.
Yes, I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Perot. What will you do as President to open foreign markets to fair competition from American business and to stop unfair competition here at home from foreign countries so that we can bring jobs back to the United States?
That's right at the top of my agenda. We've shipped millions of jobs overseas. And we have a strange situation because we have a process in Washington where after you've served for a while, you cash in, become a foreign lobbyist, make $30,000 a month, then take a leave, work on presidential campaigns, make sure you got good contacts, and then go back out. Now, if you just want to get down to brass tacks, first thing you ought to do is get all these folks who've got these one-way trade agreements that we've negotiated over the years and say, fellas, we'll take the same deal we gave you. And they'll gridlock right at that point because, for example, we've got international competitors who simply could not unload their cars off the ships if they had to comply. You see, if it was a two-way street, just couldn't do it. We have got to stop sending jobs overseas. To those of you in the audience who are business people, pretty simple. If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, pay $1 an hour for labor, hire a young 25, let's assume you've been in business for a long time, you've got a mature workforce. Pay $1 an hour for your labor, have no health care, that's the most expensive single element in making a car, have no environmental controls, no pollution controls, and no retirement, and you don't care about anything but making money, there will be a giant sucking sound going south. So if the people send me to Washington, the first thing I'll do is study that 2,000-page agreement and make sure it's a two-way street. One last point here. I decided I was dumb and didn't understand it, so I called a who's who of the folks who've been around it. And I said, why won't everybody go south? They said, we'll be disruptive. I said, for how long? I finally got them up for 12 to 15 years. And I said, well, how does it stop being disruptive? And that is when their jobs come up from $1 an hour to $6 an hour and ours go down to $6 an hour, then it's leveled again. But in the meantime, you've wrecked the country with these kinds of deals. We've got to cut it out.
Thank you, Mr. Perot. I see that the President has stood up, so he must have something to say about this.
Carol, the thing that saved us in this global economic slowdown has been our exports. And what I'm trying to do is increase our exports. And if indeed all the jobs were going to move south because they're lower wages now, and they haven't done that. And so I have just negotiated with the President of Mexico the North American Free Trade Agreement and the Prime Minister of Canada, I might add. And I want to have more of these free trade agreements because export jobs are increasing far faster than any jobs that may have moved overseas. That's a scare tactic because it's not that many. But anyone that's here, we want to have more jobs here. And the way to do that is to increase our exports. Some believe in protection. I don't. I believe in free and fair trade, and that's the thing that saved us. And so I will keep on as president trying to get a successful conclusion to the GATT round, the big Uruguay round of trade, which will really open up markets for our agriculture particularly. I want to continue to work after we get this NAFTA agreement ratified this coming year. I want to get one with Eastern Europe. I want to get one with Chile. And free and fair trade is the answer, not protection. And as I say, we've had tough economic times, and it's exports that have saved us, exports that have built.
Governor Clinton.
I'd like to answer the question because I've actually been a governor for 12 years, so I've known a lot of people who've lost their jobs because of jobs moving overseas, and I know a lot of people whose plants have been strengthened by increasing exports. The trick is to expand our export base and to expand trade on terms that are fair to us. It is true that our exports to Mexico, for example, have gone up and our trade deficit's gone down. It's also true that just today a record high trade deficit was announced with Japan. So what is the answer? Let me just mention three things very quickly. Number one, make sure that other countries are as open to our markets as our markets are to them. And if they're not, have measures on the books that don't take forever and a day to implement. Number two, change the tax code. There are more deductions in the tax code for shutting plants down and moving them overseas than there are for modernizing plant and equipment here. Our competitors don't do that. Emphasize and subsidize modernizing plant and equipment here, not moving plants overseas. Number three, stop the federal government's program that now gives low-interest loans and job training funds to companies that will actually shut down and move to other countries, but we won't do the same thing for plants that stay here. So more trade, but on fair terms, and favor investment in America.
Thank you. I think we have a question over here.
The North American Free Trade Agreement, a deal to knock down trade barriers between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Good or bad for Americans?
These numbers they give of exports from the United States are not realistic numbers. For example, they count in the government figures automobile parts going into Mexico to be put into cars made by U.S. car companies in Mexico and shipped back to the United States to be sold as if Mexican consumers bought those parts. That didn't happen. Then if you take let's just say you have a piece of glass crystal that you spend $100 making it in this country, you're going to send it to Mexico to have $10 of additional work done to it. They count it as a $100 export, then they count it as $100 to come into Mexico from the U.S., then they count it as a $110 import back in the United States. Now then, when you look at how they count, the real export figures to Mexican consumers are tiny. The used factory equipment coming from U.S. factories going into Mexico, new factories going to Mexico.
Are not bought?
No. It's a Zenith moves equipment from the U.S. into Mexico. That's used equipment. Then we count that as if Mexican consumers bought it. Nobody bought anything. Old equipment just came to Mexico.
Why are trade unions so opposed to it then?
Well, some of them.
If you're a friend who makes the tire and he's a union member, is going to benefit from this, why is the unions aligned with Ross Perot? Why do we have this alignment of Ross Perot unions, Jesse Jackson, Pat Buchanan, and Ralph Nader?
Because some of them make the same mistake that, with all due respect, Mr. Perot makes. They confuse the bad trade deals in the past with this one, which is the first time we've been able to get one that's even Steven, with zero taxes on both sides.
Let's go to the big picture and skip the personal stuff. People who don't make anything can't buy anything. Let's start with that. We are 85% of the market. Canada is 11% of the buying power.
Of the total free market.
And Mexico is only 4%. People who don't make anything cannot buy anything. Never forget that. Here's Mexico, 4%, Canada, 11%, United States, 85%. We're the biggest buyer of goods and services in the world. Please remember that tonight. That's one of our aces. Down to here, and that's what you're really talking about. And just remember this. If you want to trade, you trade with people who make money. You don't trade with people who oppress their workers and they don't have any money. Now, it's true. Now, a good deal will sell itself, folks, just plain talk. 4 former presidents came out for it and couldn't sell it. All the secretaries of state came out for it and couldn't sell it. We had satellite going across 200 auditoriums across the country. That didn't sell it. Got Lee Iacocca for it. That didn't sell it. $30 million coming out of Mexico, and that is rotten and that is wrong, and that didn't sell it. $35 million coming out of corporate America to try to get out of this country, go south of the border and hire that cheap labor, and that didn't sell it.
Let me know.
This dog just didn't hunt. Now, today they don't have the votes in the House of Representatives. We're in the third quarter. They can get them because they're buying them big time with your tax money. We're working the halls night and day to make sure it doesn't happen. You can play a key role in it. But sure, they all tried to sell it to you, and the fact that they couldn't demonstrates that this deal is not good for our country.
Let me get a break and then, but I want this.
The prospect of reaching new cross-border trade deals was very much on the mind of President Obama during his trip to Mexico this week. But a trade agreement that is now 2 decades old and still the subject of debate is casting a long shadow over the president's plans. Jeffrey Brown has the story.
Canada and Mexico are two of our largest trading partners, with trade that supports millions of American jobs.
President Obama's one-day summit with his Mexican and Canadian counterparts marked 20 years of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA.
American exports to Canada.
Many years later, the debate over its effects goes on.
Been a good deal for both Canada and the United States. Both have gained jobs, both have gained trade flows, both have become more competitive in the world marketplace as a result.
And there is a tooth fairy and there is an Easter bunny.
Even as President Obama pushes for new trade agreements, one with the European Union and another, the Trans-Pacific Partnership with Asian nations.
What I've said to President Peña Nieto and Prime Minister Harper is, we'll get this passed.
The United States is engaging in the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade negotiations. We're pursuing a regional agreement with the nations of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We are also pressing ahead with negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Trans-Pacific Partnership, a new free trade agreement. We are very committed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. Trans-Pacific Partnership. Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. We should aim for true regional integration. And that is the spirit behind the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. High-quality Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're excited about the innovative trade agreement called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. 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 Trans-Pacific Partnership. A far-reaching new trade agreement called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. From new trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we also discussed the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We've used trade negotiations over the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
There's another question I got asking you where you stand on Trans-Pacific Partnership.
There are questions being raised about this current agreement. It hasn't been fully negotiated yet, so I don't know what the final provisions are yet.
So these years later, what has NAFTA brought and how should it influence future trade decisions? For that, we turn back to two people who joined us for this debate from its beginnings. Carla Sills served as U.S. Trade Representative from 1989 through 1993 under the first President Bush and helped negotiate NAFTA. Today, she heads her own global trade and investment consulting firm. And Lori Wallach is director of the Global Trade Watch Policy Group at Public Citizen, a nonpartisan advocacy organization. And welcome back to both of you. You were smiling as you saw the video of yourself involved in those negotiations,
Just
right?
the other day.
So 20 years later, Carla Hills, what did NAFTA do? What did it accomplish?
NAFTA was a first-rate trade agreement in 1994 when it went into effect. It eliminated industrial tariffs. It opened up the agricultural market, which we haven't been able to do in any other agreement. Had a first-rate intellectual property protection. It provided openings for our service providers. It required national treatment, protection for our investors, and as a result, our trade with Mexico and Canada have soared 400%, and our investment is up fivefold.
A success story.
These numbers they give of exports from the United States are not realistic numbers. For example, they count in the government figures automobile parts going into Mexico to be put into cars made by U.S. car companies in Mexico and shipped back to the United States to be sold as if Mexican consumers bought those parts. That didn't happen. Then if you take let's just say you have a piece of glass crystal that you spend $100 making it in this country. You're going to send it to Mexico to have $10 of additional work done to it. They count it as a $100 export. Then they count it as $100 to come into Mexico from the U.S. Then they count it as a $110 import back in the United States. Now then, when you look at how they count, the real export figures to Mexican consumers are tiny.
I believe it's a success story.
Lori Wallach, I know you saw it differently back then. 20 years later, how do you see it?
Well, we really underpredicted what the damage would be. So there has been a large increase in trade, but a lot of it's been a flood of new NAFTA imports. NAFTA did include investor protections. Those incentivized offshoring of U.S. investment and jobs. So while we've seen a flood of more trade, it's 700% of that is actually the imports. So we've had a growth in our trade deficit of almost 500%, 480%. So just the numbers. Before NAFTA, we had a slight surplus with Mexico in trade, and with Canada, we had about a $30 billion deficit. The end-of-year U.S. International Trade Commission official government trade data came out last week. We have a $177 billion combined NAFTA trade deficit. Using the administration's old multiplier of what that means for jobs, that's a net loss over accumulation of over 1 million jobs. And there's a government database that has 845,000 specific NAFTA casualties to our manufacturing workers who've been certified for assistance.
All right,
With these investment rules promoting the offshoring of the investment, our exports have actually declined as far as the growth rate. So, as our economies get bigger, export volumes increase. But just looking at the US ITC data, our growth in exports in goods to the NAFTA countries is down to 62% of the level growth rate of what it was. For services, it's even down actually in half. So we have a trade agreement that's actually been a penalty on our export growth. And the only reason I mention that is the whole premise of NAFTA, its promise, 200,000 new U.S. jobs a year. Woo-hoo. But that was based on having an improved trade deficit reduction. Instead, we have a huge new trade deficit. So we've hemorrhaged jobs. And more importantly, the biggest effect of NAFTA is it's fundamentally transformed the composition of jobs available and therefore wages for the 63% of Americans who don't have a college degree. Those manufacturing jobs are gone. And the service sector jobs, says the Bureau of Labor Statistics, pay less by 20%.
This, of course, is a big issue that we look
The
at all
income
the time
inequality
here,
issue.
right? Jobs and income inequality.
Yeah.
Your suggestion is that much of that is due to something like NAFTA.
Yeah.
You just don't see that as a factor in...
I do not. On the manufacturing, when I was U.S. trade representative, I went on the factory floor of an auto company. There were people all around, screwing in things, making things. Today, you go on the floor of an automobile factory, there's nobody there. It's done by computers
And that has nothing
and technology.
to do with
It has nothing to do with the NAFTA. I agree with Lori Wallach that we've got to worry about the lowest 2 quintiles. I care about that, and I think there are things we can do. But trade is an advantage. When a multinational company like Caterpillar invests in Mexico, the Peterson Institute for International Economics has done a wonderful study to show that for the foreign investment in an affiliate in a foreign country, I didn't say that correctly, an American company that invests in a foreign facility actually creates jobs at home. So we shouldn't look at this as a negative.
Let me try to move it up to date now, because as I mentioned in our setup, there are several new potential agreements. So Lori Wallach, you start here. When you look at something like a Trans-Pacific partnership, what lessons specifically do you think should be learned from NAFTA in thinking about whether to proceed with something like that?
Well, the heartbreak is that the TPP is basically NAFTA on steroids with 9 more countries. So the US, Mexico, and Canada are in it, but then so is, for instance, 28 cents an hour minimum wage Vietnam.
And just remember this, if you want to trade, you trade with people who make money. You don't trade with people who oppress their workers and they don't have any money.
So is Malaysia. And if you look at that whole block, all of the rules that were in NAFTA that promoted this downward pressure on wages, I mean, we lost 40,000 factories in those 20 years. It is true there's automation, but in addition, we saw a whole shift in the composition of jobs and what kind of jobs are available for people in our economy. And there's economic consensus that actually trade's a major contributor to income inequality. We have the whole literature search of all of the studies from the Pearson Institute to across the spectrum on our website at tradewatch.org. If people want to go read the studies, you can link back to all of these different think tanks. The only debate is what percentage of income inequality is caused by trade. So now you look at the TPP. At its heart are the same rules that were in NAFTA, the investor protections that promote offshoring, but to an even lower wage country, Vietnam. And so the companies are excited about this. They look at the ban on Buy America procurement in there. They look at the right to import food and products that don't meet our standards, the right to offshore to Vietnam, and you can see why they're interested. But the public opinion polling shows Democrats, Republicans, independents are against anything that even smells like a NAFTA expansion.
All right, well, but this is what the president is running up against, right, Carla Hills? He's getting a lot of opposition across the board, actually, to these kinds of expanded trade agreements.
A good deal will sell itself, folks, just plain talk. 4 former presidents came out for it and couldn't sell it. All the secretaries of state came out for it and couldn't sell it. We had satellite going across 200 auditoriums across the country. That didn't sell it. Got Lee Iacocca for it. That didn't sell it. $30 million coming out of Mexico, and that is rotten and that is wrong, and that didn't sell it. $35 million coming out of corporate America to try to get out of this country, go south of the border and hire that cheap labor, and that didn't sell it.
Let me know.
This dog just didn't hunt.
Yes, politically it's difficult. And I ask think tanks, universities, the media to explain to people the benefits of trade. I wish to respond to the suggestion that the NAFTA has depressed wages. In fact, just last year there was a study by Yale and our own Fed which said that the wages were increased as a result of NAFTA, not hugely, but adjusted for inflation, definitely there was an increase in wages in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Well, on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I would like to see us build on the NAFTA platform. I'd like to work and create market openings in Vietnam, in Brunei, in Japan, that provides the North American economies working as a partnership to do more abroad, because we are the most competitive platform you can find in the world.
All right.
You haven't done it in 30 years or 26 years.
Well,
any number you
I've
want to
been
do.
a senator,
You
Donald,
haven't done it.
And
you haven't
I
done
have
it.
been a
And
Secretary of State, and I have
Your
done
husband signed
a lot.
NAFTA, which was one of the worst things that ever happened
Well,
to the
that's your
manufacturing
opinion.
industry.
That is your
You go to
opinion.
New England, you go to Ohio, Pennsylvania, you go anywhere you want, Secretary Clinton, and you will see devastation where manufacturing is down 30, 40, sometimes 50%. NAFTA is the worst trade deal maybe ever signed anywhere, but certainly ever signed in this country. And now you want to approve Trans-Pacific Partnership. You were totally in favor of it. Then you heard what I was saying, how bad it is, and you said, I can't win that debate. But you know that if you did win, you would approve that, and that will be almost as bad as NAFTA. Nothing will ever top NAFTA.
That is just not accurate.
And we need to keep upping our game, both bilaterally and with partners across the region through agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. Australia is a critical partner. This TPP sets the gold standard in trade agreements to open, free, transparent, fair trade, the kind of environment that has the rule of law and a level playing field.
I was against it once it was finally negotiated and the terms were laid out. I wrote about that in...
You called it the gold standard.
Well, I hope...
You called it the gold standard of trade deals. You said it's the finest deal you've ever seen.
No.
And then you heard what I said about it, and all of a sudden you were against it.
Well, Donald, I know you live in your own reality, but that is not the facts. The facts are, I did say I hoped it would be a good deal, but... So we have a very robust set of plans, and people who have looked at both of our plans have concluded that mine would create 10 million jobs and yours would lose us 3.5 million jobs and explode
You are
the
going
debt,
to approve one of
which
the biggest
would
tax
have
cuts
a
in
recession.
history. You are going to approve one of the biggest tax increases in history. you are going to drive business out. Your regulations are a disaster, and you're going to increase regulations all over the place. And by the way, my tax cut is the biggest since Ronald Reagan. I'm very proud of it. It will create tremendous numbers of new jobs. But regulations, you are going to regulate these businesses out of existence. When I go around, Lester, I tell you this, I've been all over. And when I go around, despite the tax cut, the things that business and people like the most is the fact that I'm cutting regulation. You have regulations on top of regulations, and new companies cannot form, and old companies are going out of business, and you want to increase the regulations and make them even worse. I'm going to cut regulations, but I'm going to cut taxes big league, and you're going to raise taxes big league. End of story.
Let me get you to pause right there, because we're going to move into the next segment. We're going to talk taxes.
That can't be left
Please
to stand.
Take 30 seconds.
I kind of assumed that there would be a lot of these charges and claims. And so we have taken the homepage of my website, HillaryClinton.com, and we've turned it into a fact checker. So if you want to see in real time what the facts are, please go and take a look. Because
take a look at mine also, and you'll see.
Not add a penny to the debt.
To the loss of millions of decent-paying jobs. What I simply don't understand, if we were going forward in the first place, new idea, maybe give it a shot. But when we went forward with NAFTA, went forward with CAFTA, went forward with permanent normal trade relations, and we heard all of these folks telling us how great these agreements were going to be, and it turned out that virtually everything that they said was inaccurate, not true. Why in God's name would we go forward with another trade agreement, which is in fact larger than previous trade agreements? And let me just give you an example of what I mean, Mr. President. On September 19, 1993, President Bill Clinton said the following, quote, "I believe that NAFTA will create 200,000 American jobs in the first 2 years of its effect. I believe that NAFTA will create 1 million jobs in the first 5 years of its impact," end of quote. President Clinton was pushing the NAFTA agreement very, very hard, and that's what he said. In 1993, same year, the Heritage Foundation, one of the most conservative think tanks in the country. So here you have a liberal president, Bill Clinton, you have a conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation. This is what they said. Virtually all economists agree that NAFTA will produce a net increase of U.S. jobs over the next decade.
And people who have looked at both of our plans have concluded that mine would create 10 million jobs and yours would lose us 3.5 million jobs and explode the debt.
In 1993, the distinguished senator from Kentucky, who is now our majority leader, Mitch McConnell, this is what he said, and I quote, "American firms will not move to Mexico just for lower wages." Mitch McConnell. American firms will not move to Mexico just for lower wages. Well, was President Clinton right? Was the Heritage Foundation right? Was Senator McConnell right? No. I think the evidence is pretty clear that they were all wrong. According to the well-respected economists at the Economic Policy Institute, and their facts are usually hold up pretty well, NAFTA has led to the loss of more than 680,000 American jobs, 680,000 American jobs. What President Clinton said was wrong. What the Heritage Foundation said was wrong. We lost substantial numbers of jobs. In 1993, the year before NAFTA was implemented, the United States had a trade surplus with Mexico of more than $1.6 billion. Last year, the trade deficit with Mexico was $53 billion. We had a trade surplus of $1.6 billion. Last year, we had a deficit of $53 billion. Now, how is that a success? I don't quite know. In other words, Mr. President, NAFTA has been a disaster for American workers. What about the Chinese trade agreement? I remember hearing all of the discussions about how great it would be if we had a trade agreement with a huge country like China. Think about all of the American products that they would be buying, manufactured here in the United States. Here is what President Clinton again. President Bill Clinton said about PNTR with China back in 1999. And it's important to remember what people said, because they're saying the same thing about this trade agreement. But this is back in 1999, Bill Clinton, President, PNTR with China. Quote, "In opening the economy of China, the agreement will create unprecedented opportunities for American farmers, workers, and companies to compete successfully in China's market. This is a 100-0 deal for America when it comes to the economic consequences," end of quote. Once again, that's a liberal president. Now you have the conservative think tanks who love unfettered free trade. In 1999, discussing PNTR with China, the conservative economists at the Cato Institute, these are really conservative guys, this is what they said, quote, "The silliest argument against PNTR is that Chinese imports would overwhelm U.S. industry. In fact, American workers are far more productive than their Chinese counterparts. PNTR would create far more export opportunities for America than the Chinese." Well, what can we say about that? Cato Institute wrote in 1999, quote, "The silliest argument against PNTR is that Chinese imports would overwhelm U.S. industry." Yeah, right. So you go out to any department store in America and you buy products. Where are those products made? Guess what? They're made in China. It appears that, in fact, Chinese imports did overwhelm U.S. industry. Cato Institute was dead wrong. Mr. President, again, nobody is really surprised that there's no more debate about this. Permanent normal trade relations with China, that trade agreement was a disaster. The Economic Policy Institute has estimated that that trade agreement with China has led to the loss of 2.7 million American jobs. The trade deficit with China has increased from $83 billion in 2001 to $342 billion in 2014. Now, in terms of China, I don't know that the American people have any doubt about it. Every time we go shopping, the products overwhelmingly made in China. People look at their own towns and their own states. My state, loss of more and more manufacturing jobs. Since 2001, we have lost 60,000 manufacturing facilities in America. Not all of it is attributable to trade. There are other reasons, but a lot of it is attributable to trade. Millions of decent-paying jobs gone. People thrown out on the street as companies move to China, Vietnam, and other low-wage countries. There's not a debate about it. That is exactly what has happened. Corporation after corporation has said, why do I want to pay an American worker $15, $20 an hour? Why do I want to deal with a union? Why do I have to obey environmental regulations? I can move to China, I can move to Vietnam, I can move to Malaysia, I can move to Mexico, I can pay people pennies an hour, bring the product back into the United States. That is what they said, that is what they have done. Major corporation after major corporation has reduced employment in America at the same time as they have increased employment in other countries. And not only is it the loss of jobs, it is the race to the bottom. It is employers saying to workers, look, I'm cutting your health care, I'm not giving you a raise, and if you don't like it, I'm moving to China. Because we got people all over the world who are prepared to work for wages a lot lower than you are receiving. You take it or leave it. And that is one of the reasons why today the typical American worker is working longer hours for lower wages than he or she used to, and why wages have gone down in America. That's what the global economy has done. That is what these horrendous, unfettered free trade agreements have pushed on American workers. That's the Chinese trade agreement. An estimated 2.7 million American jobs lost. Then you got the Korean free trade agreement, which has led to a loss of some 60,000 jobs. Our trade deficit with that country has gone up from $16.6 billion in 2012 to $25 billion in 2014. So you have a history here of failed trade agreement after failed trade agreement after failed trade agreement, and people say, hey, we failed, let's do the same thing again, and this time we...
This TPP sets the gold standard in trade agreements to open, free, transparent, fair trade, the kind of environment that has the rule of law and a level playing field.
Succeed. I don't think anybody believes that. And I do understand that Wall Street loves this trade agreement. You know, they are staying up nights worrying about ordinary Americans. And I understand that the major corporations in this country, all of them, love this agreement. And the drug companies love this agreement, which should give you enough reason to hold this agreement in doubt. Now, Mr. President, the administration, the Obama administration says, well, trust us. Forget about the other trade agreements. This TPP is something different. It's a better agreement. This time it'll be different. This time it'll support about 650,000 American jobs. Well, supporters of unfettered free trade were wrong about NAFTA, they were wrong about CAFTA, they were wrong about PNTR with China, they were wrong about the Korean free trade agreement, and surprise of all surprises, they are wrong again. Mr. President, if the fast track is approved, it would pave the way for the passage of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. And as you know, this trade agreement is poised to be the largest free trade agreement in history, encompassing 12 nations that account for roughly 40% of the global economy. This is a very, very big deal. Let me just talk about two of those countries who are involved in the TPP, and that is Vietnam and Malaysia. Mr. President, we are fighting here, and I understand there are differences of opinion. We are fighting here in the United States Congress to raise the minimum wage. I happen to believe that a $7.25 minimum wage, which is what it is federally, is a starvation wage. I would like to see it go over a period of years up to $15 an hour. You may disagree. There are others who disagree. But let me tell you what the minimum wage is in Vietnam. The minimum wage in Vietnam is 56 cents an hour.
And I said, well, how does it stop being disruptive? And that is when their jobs come up from $1 an hour to $6 an hour and ours go down to $6 an hour, then it's leveled again. But in the meantime, you've wrecked the country with these kinds of deals.
$0.56 an hour. So you have American workers being forced to compete against people who make 56 cents an hour. And we have a situation, just as one example of many, where the Nike company, a company which produces over 365 million pairs of athletic shoes each year, goes all over the world. 365 million pairs of athletic shoes. You know how many of those athletic shoes are manufactured in the United States of America? 50 million, 20 million, 10 million, 1 million, zero. On the other hand, they employ 330,000 workers in Vietnam, mostly young women, and while they refuse to give us the detailed information, our supposition is that most of those women make very, very low wages.
And we have a strange situation because we have a process in Washington where after you've served for a while, you cash in, become a foreign lobbyist, make $30,000 a month, then take a leave, work on presidential campaigns, make sure you got good contacts, and then go back out. You know what the problem is, folks? It's foreign lobbyists are wrecking this whole thing. Right here, Time magazine just says it all. It says, in spite of Clinton's protests, the influence peddling machine in Washington is back in high gear. The headline, Time magazine, a lobbyist paradise.
I'd like to respond to
We are being sold out by foreign lobbyists. We've got 33 of them working on this in the biggest lobbying effort in the history of our country to ram NAFTA down your throat.
I'd like to
So
respond.
bad news. The good news is it ain't working.
Okay.
I'll turn it over to the other.
You didn't lobby the Ways and Means Committee? You didn't have people lobbying the Ways and Means Committee for tax
What are you
breaks
talking about?
in the 1970s?
Well, keep going.
Have you?
Well, did you or did you not? I mean, it's not.
Well, you're so general, I can't pin it down.
Yeah, but yeah,
I mean, 1970s.
No,
I'm not charging anything illegal,
no,
but
that's
this
not the point.
blunderbuss
That's
attack
not-
on
No,
all lobbying.
I think he did that. You made a statement about lobbying.
Just a minute. Wait just a minute. Let's talk about the lobbying reforms. That's the biggest sham in history. All you had to do was take a pledge. A pledge is like a pledge to quit drinking. We don't have lobbying reform under Clinton yet. We will get it, but we don't have it yet. And this stuff they've come up with is nothing. And if you look at who's running all these economic negotiations, it's a who's who of former foreign lobbyists now in the Clinton administration.
Okay. McLean,
Fact.
Virginia. Hello.
All right, guys. So yeah, I wanted to see what happened to Ross Perot. You know, I was making this video and I became curious. I mean, this guy was, you know, I remember him. I guess I was in my teens. Yeah, when this guy was running for president, and yeah, I wasn't following much politics back then, but I do remember one thing. Whenever he was on TV, I would stop, watch, and listen. I didn't really pay attention to, you know, Bush and Clinton back then, but when he was talking, I don't know if it was the accent, you know, the plain talk, whatever, it just made me want to listen to him. So, yeah, I had a little bit of nostalgia when I was going through here, you know, running these clips together. So, you know, I became curious, you know, what happened to the guy. You know, because he was, you know, he was the front runner early on in that election. He was doing good in the debates, but, you know, he dropped out, and I didn't know why, so I wanted to find out why. So, anyways, here we go. In Perot's mind, the press is just the handmaiden of the people in power, and reporters go along because they have no choice. Most of this stuff is not originated by the press, he said. It's accepted by the press without a filter. It comes from the one true source. The party in power has this interesting network of contacts, feeds, leaks, etc. And the press people's income really depends on their keeping their contacts, keeping their access. In other words, they got to maintain, you know, they got to stay in contact with the people in power. Now, in Mr. Perot's mind, the whole machinery has turned against him, just as the British turned their guns on the Minutemen. So he's saying the entire press corps turned against him. The entire media has turned against him. Anyways, here's the last part of his quote. Everybody warned me. They said, Perot, you've got such a clean record. They've got to try to redefine you and try to destroy you. And the rest is history. I mean, there you have it right there. So they got to try to redefine them and try to destroy them. That's a smear. He's saying it's a smear campaign. So that was July 2nd, 1992, Morning Star, some reporter named David Broder. So I didn't want to sit there. I wanted to get more, you know, some more details. So October 25th, 1992, or October 26th, 1992, he said he had withdrawn after hearing that President Bush's campaign was scheming to smear his daughter with a computer-altered photograph and to disrupt her wedding. So yeah, he's talking about the Republican campaign, not the Clinton campaign, not the Democratic. He's talking about the Republicans. Smear his daughter with a computer-altered photograph. Okay, so But I wanted to get, more. I wanted to see if I could find anything. So anyways, I found this one here. Some lady, Rachel Maddow, from MSNBC. It's 2015, so July 23rd, 2015 interview. Reporter. Now he claims it was because the Republicans mounted a dirty tricks campaign against his daughter Caroline. The family says the plan was to portray her as a lesbian. Yeah, so that's his claim, and I don't think he ever offered any proof of it. So yeah, I don't know. All right, guys. Actually, I'm going to end this here because I'm going to make another video, because it turns out as the more I was investigating this stuff here with what happened to Ross Perot, the more interesting it got, the more complicated, and the more stuff I found out. And a lot of this, it really mirrors what's going on today. Redefine you, destroy you, smear campaign, altered photographs. So I'm going to make another video about it, and kind of I believe it will shed some light on what we're seeing today. Keep in mind, this this election, it's really a big issue. This TPP, as you saw, earlier on in the video, this is a very big issue, and it needs our attention. Unsubstantiated allegations of, sexual misconduct by Trump. It's not important, and the previous, allegations against Bill Clinton. That really doesn't need our attention either. What we really need to focus on for this election is which politician is going to be better for the American people and the country. That's really what we should be focusing on. So, yeah. Anyways, all right, guys. Hope you liked the video. Peace.